I am DM Zone. This is Gamers Oasis. Let's get into it. Okay, guys. So we're going to talk about in this video my update in position, I guess you could say, or really the update of the books, clarification of my position on the classes and races based upon Supplement 1 in the original Core 3 rule books from 1974. After hundreds of hours of playing this game and all the research I've done into trying to understand how this set of rules came about, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding and the ability to interpret what they were trying to say. So that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to be covering many aspects and then pointing you to videos on stuff that's for the most part already out. So if you haven't seen a lot of my content, or you're wanting to know more about original Dungeons and Dragons and how it was played back then, or how I played at my table, then stick around and we'll go ahead and talk about it. So dwarves become more detailed in their appearance. It gets into their height, their weight, their styles, their hair colors, this type of stuff. It also gets more into the fact that there are mountain dwarves, hill dwarves, and what they call burrowers. There's also the suggestion that gnomes exist in more ways than just as an NPC or a monster, but it doesn't really go into that specifically and clarify it. It also talks a lot about the fact that fighters with improved strength can get additional levels, thus taking a 17 strength to a level 7 fighter and a 18 strength to a level 8 fighter. Now they lose this ability when they become fighter thieves, the new class, but they do gain the whole thief side of things. They have to be wearing leather armor when this occurs. Otherwise, they don't count as thieves. Now, one of the nice things about this book is it does clarify and actually give, without necessarily just hinting at the fact that dwarves had infravision. They now clearly do have it. They still are tiptoeing around the concept of dwarves and clerics. As a modernist looking back at this, I'm not 100% sure why they would do that. One of the more interesting things about their version of the cleric that I like is that NPC clerics that are dwarves can go up to level 7th level, and the only people they're able to raise are other dwarves. Now, I don't know if that's heal, but one could say they'd probably be more inclined to heal only dwarves. And that's a take. Whether you are for or against it, I think really depends on your play angle and style. I think that is a potentially problematic type of thing, but I feel like there are groups of people who just don't get along with other groups, and I think that's okay for that to exist as long as you're not targeting real people with that or promoting that against real people. I think that'd be the main thing. This is a fantasy game. Now, not to be left out of this targeting other races, the elves. They are also still very much exclusionary for the most part, in many fantasy novels in particular. But in this one, they also have expanded their appearance, becoming more detailed. They've also gone into more of the different races. We have wood elves, high elves, and something called a meadow elf. I feel like that's probably something more akin to like a Celtic elf, as they would know it, versus the Nordic elves of the original descent, probably. There's also the direct relation to fairies. Again, we have gnomes, we have fairies. Some people say gnomes come from a fae-like world, so maybe they're incorporating cousins of the original races into this, starting their early expansion into different things. I think that's good, and that's actually what I did in my game too. Gnomes come from the Feywild, as I call it. And I spell it differently than D&D does, and so does a type of elf. Those type of elves, though, are not in line with normal elves, which the humans can get along with. But I won't get into that. All ironically, though, Chainmail had elves and fairies too, and this was released prior to the 1974 D&D. And the elves of that were probably like the elves you would expect to see from the Feywild, which would probably be those meadow elves, if I was a guess. Anyways, uh, elves don't suffer the same restrictions to being multi-class that dwarves do. I think that's because this fully defines that they are only one class at a time. So you're not both a fighter and a magic user. So your level bonuses apply to whatever class you're playing. So if you have a high intelligence or a high strength, then those increased levels of 17 and 18, giving you a +1 to +2 in general to the original caps you had. So a magic user can go to a 9, for example. Elves can now get up to a 6th level fighter. That I feel like is incentive for elves to be more than just a certain class, whatever they feel like, because maybe it's better for this elf to be that way and better for this elf to be that way because one has a higher strength than the other, or one doesn't have any bonus levels, for example. And I think that brings a little microcosm of difference between a elf that is a fighter magic user and an elf that's a fighter magic user. It's also important to say that they bring in clerics to elves as well. They specifically say that the elf becomes a fighter magic user cleric. I really don't like that. I feel like that you shouldn't be both a cleric and a magic user at the same time. I feel like the original 1974 rules made that pretty clear when it says that a cleric cannot be a magic user and a magic user cannot be a cleric when it's talking about changing classes. Now, I don't know what specifically race they were talking about when they did that. When you read the rules, it seems like there's a very narrow scope of people this could actually be affecting. And I don't know if that was meant for more classes that were reincarnated. They come back as something different that is not beneficial for them to be the original class. And I don't know technically if they were to do that, like, do they lose all their other XP? Or they just switch over at that level, at that XP amount, I should say, not that level. The reason why I feel this is because magic is very powerful in original Dungeons and Dragons, and a class should not be wielding both. There is a method and a manner of that happening. If you were to start looking at things like incorporating 3rd edition prestige classes, I think that is a way you could get there. And the reason why you know that is beneficial is because people get frustrated that prestige classes start so late and the levels of spells are so little. So it's not overpowered. Where it becomes overpowered is when you start to have clerics doing sleep and turn undead, for example. And that's the problem I have with it. And that could be literally a thing that occurs at 2nd level if you were to do it this way, and or 1st level if you're a magic user thief. And the other half of that is when you get to 2nd level, you now start to incorporate cure light wounds. And then when the magic user side gets to 3rd level, you start to incorporate things like hold person, or a cleric side gets a hold person and this type of stuff. And then there are reasons why certain spells are different levels between the magic user and the cleric, and that kind of goes out the window. That's why I'm against it. Anyway, I've spent way too long against why I'm against something. Let me get back into this so I don't nitpick everything to death. There still is a 3rd class that's enjoyable by the elf, dividing their XP 3 ways, not 2 ways, in my opinion. That is the fighter magic user thief, or you could switch out the magic user for cleric and be a fighter cleric thief. And while that would be far rarer, I would assume, it probably could be something that would be allowed. Unlike dwarves, though, they get their bonuses and maintain them. So I think that goes back, as I said earlier, they can only be one class at a time, and it gives autonomy to the different types and ways to play the class. Halflings are the only ones, actually, that can be fighters or thieves or fighter thieves. They don't say this outright, but I kind of feel like you have to pick from the beginning. You can't decide, oh, I've reached max level fighter, I'm going to go ahead and become a thief now. I don't like that concept, and I don't think that that should be a way to get around the splitting of XP and then having a fighter thief level slower on the thief side because they are spending half their XP on fighter, which is not technically leveling because it stops at 4th level. I think that that's the bed you lay in, and it just is how it is. That was the way the game was designed, and I feel like that should be a way it's played out. Interestingly enough, halflings are still not appreciated in this way either. Even when they are just a fighter, they cannot raise their fighter levels. They can't do that because it takes you to 6th level, and that's kind of silly, in my opinion. Or they don't like halflings still. I don't know. I don't know what the thought process is. Maybe the thought process is no one's ever going to play just a halfling fighter. We're not even going to promote the idea of it. They're either going to be thieves or they're going to be fighter thieves. And I can kind of understand what they're saying with that. They did step back a little bit on the halfling side of things, allowing them now to be neutral. I don't know. Maybe that's because they could be thieves and it didn't make sense to have all your halfling thieves be lawful. I still think that chaotic should be allowed. I mean, look at Gollum. He was some sort of halfling race before he turned to the dark side, essentially, with greed. I still think that should be allowed, not just as an NPC. They allow chaotic characters to be played in groups. I don't know why you would exclude a halfling to not be chaotic. But I think if I'm going to allow chaotic or evil characters in my group, I would allow a halfling to be that. Half-elves are the new race. I've done a whole video talking about half-elves, so I'm not going to go into it too deep here. I'll just say that there are also videos on the paladin and thief class specifically. So I'll link to that if I can so you can find it easier, but they're in my playlist. You can look at my channel, and they're pretty good videos, lengthy videos on this topic. I also find it interesting that elves in general were not clarified further as far as what they were meaning in the areas that were points of confusion in the 1974 books. I just decided, we're good. We're going to move on. And they did, and they didn't talk about it anymore. Now, the two new classes, stepping back into the supplement one, is the thief and the paladin. Both these are major elements moving forward in Dungeons and Dragons. The thieves are literally the 4th pillar, as one might know it. And paladins are probably the best known or the second best known subclass of all the classes. And I'm not talking about just a fighter, but I'm talking about really probably of all. I would say top 3 probably would be like Bard, Barbarian, and Paladin. Maybe a Sorcerer. I could see that as being in the top 4, and then those probably could be interchangeable depending on your play style amongst those. This book clarifies to make sure that people know that there is no benefit for having a greater wisdom. A 3 or an 18 wisdom means nothing to a cleric. They know the same number of spells. They have the same ability to cast spells. The book refers to this as divinely given, very specific wording. I think this is not bad as far as a statement goes. However, I think that there could be some level of intelligence that still applies. I talked about in the exceptional stat video where maybe clerics just are not able to understand the spells they're casting because they're just a lower IQ person. That's my own thoughts on that. Anyways, let's get back to cleric. So not everything is bad. There were new things that were added. For example, there are some new magic items that are pretty sick for a cleric. One of these items is the Mace of Disruption. It's nothing more than a simple mace for most people, but in the hands of a cleric striking an undead, there's a chance that it will disrupt the molecular structure of that undead. That makes the base saving throw. It makes a base save throw based upon the cleric versus undead table. It's a little hard to wrap your head around this. A thought that I came up with, and I might be just completely wrong with this and have to relook at it. Tell me in the comments down below if I got this wrong. But there's a 1 to 12 table on the turn undead for clerics, and a save throw is done with a d20. And maybe in this case, for them to save, they have to roll below the target number that is needed. So if they hit a lich and they need a 9 to turn the lich, maybe the lich has to roll a 9 or less. Thus, a higher level cleric who only needs a 7, when the cleric hits the lich has to roll a 7 or less. Maybe that's what they're trying to say. I don't know. I think it's an interesting concept, if that is what they're trying to say. But they're not very precise in their wording. It's probably a lot was known at the game table that was not actually wrote in the book. The Helm of Brilliance is basically brilliant for all classes, but the specific benefits for clerics are nice. I'll just say that. I'll talk about that in another video when I talk about some magic items in original Dungeons and Dragons. That's not quite out yet. Unless you're seeing this in the past, and then go check my channel and it might be out already. Not to be outdone though, we have the Talisman of Lawfulness. I think this clearly is not designed for a high priest. If a high priest were to touch it, they are literally sunk to the center of the earth where they are stuck there forever. I think there's some potential biblical implications into that, considering hell was considered to be inside the earth and heaven's considered to be outside the earth. But who knows what they were actually trying to say. Other clerics can touch this, but only lawful clerics can touch it without taking damage. There's a lot of mythology when it starts talking about golems and clerics. This is a different religion in the most part, and I'm not going to get into the different religions that are real world. It doesn't really talk about religion that much in these books or even really cover that a whole lot. So I found this a little bit odd that we had some sort of script being placed in the mouth of a golem type of thing, and it's being done by a cleric. Just a little odd. There are a few corrections with the gate spell. For example, it's now able to be cast by 7th level cleric or clerics that can cast 7th level spells. And the addition of Speak Undead is now in the game because that was a clear oversight. Fighters, man, this book is the enhancement, the exceptional book for fighters. It was really bringing them up, and in many ways, I'll get into that several times in the next little bit here. But let's go ahead and talk about it. It made it easier for them to hit. They hit harder. They were able to carry more, and they were able to open doors easier. Often to the exclusion of anyone who's not a fighter or without the use of magic. That's pretty intense. For example, if they have percentile strength and they're a fighter, they're able to open magically sealed doors. So things are hold portal or wizard lock, those could be opened. Kind of hidden within the rules, not so clearly stated. this is kind of referred to as bend bars. In a way that's also kind of a thing that is now there, just beyond opening doors. Beyond strength, though, fighters get dodge and parry for having a higher dexterity. Now, I talked about this in the exceptional stat video. I don't necessarily like the fact that it's going into the dodge and parry aspect of things, because parry is already a part of, in some ways, even dodge of the man-to-man combat system. And I'm going to get back into why that's more important in just a minute. But I'm not a huge fan of that. I just think you should raise the AC. It's designed to be used in the D20 system or the alternative combat system. Just raise the AC by 1, that's 5%. All the other systems that are out there don't have even percents for going up. It's all based upon a bell curve. Not going to get into that here. I've already got into it before, and when I do my overall video for Supplement 1, I talk about it in more detail there too. And in the addition to alternative combat, I talk about it more in that video too. And a little bit of an ironic twist, charisma doesn't do anything for any of the existing classes already. It just kind of continues being charisma because it was so awesome, and probably was the most important stat before strength now, for a fighter at least. For any other classes than fighter, it probably is pretty close to even. But now fighters really kind of want charisma, which is an interesting twist. So fighters with a 17 charisma who are lawful good can become paladins. They have an extremely strict ethos that is very hard to follow. You can ask Gygax's children. Apparently one of them in particular had a problem following the paladin ethos and lost his paladinhood a couple times. I'm not throwing shade. I'm just trying to put a little bit of historical context to this thing. But I'm going to talk about that when I talk about the Rogue Gallery book that I have. There's also a slight HP or hit point balance that they address in the game, talking about the difference between fighters and magic users is not enough, that they need to raise the fighters' hit points and lower the magic users' hit points to kind of bring it back to balance. Finally, they have spells that are specifically targeting fighters. For example, the strength spell gives fighters 2d4 strength or 2 to 8 versus either the cleric at a d6 or a thief at a d4. Ironically, they don't specifically say magic users. I feel like a magic user would be a d4, or at least a 1 to 2, but they don't actually include them in that list. Fighters also enjoy the use of the Helm of Brilliance, making their weapons flaming. But that's about all they get for updates in that. There wasn't a whole lot of love with those type of things beyond the expanded weapons list that pretty much anyone can use that can use those type of weapons. Magic users do not get a lot of benefits from the exceptional stats either. They just get a lot of restrictions placed upon them, an attempt to reduce their power, probably class balance type of stuff. I talked about that a lot in the exceptional stat video. I won't go back into that here, but intelligence is extremely complicated for a magic user, and it's very specific to magic users only, really designed to limit them. What I will say is that chance to know given spell, which is a percent-based system, goes higher the higher their intelligence, makes it more reliable for a high intelligent character to know more things. So there's still a benefit for having a high intelligence. That's pretty much true in all the other aspects of the new intelligence stat. I'm not going to go back into that again. I have a whole video, like I said, talking about it. All right, so going back into the rebalance, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Fighters now get a D8, clerics get a D6, thieves and magic users get a D4. So that's a way. Then there are additional bonuses that you get after a certain point every level, and a fighter gets more than a magic user or a thief. And the exceptional stat video, I actually talked about doing that even further, giving fighter specific HP. There's also a huge push in this book for swords. Some swords that do more damage versus magic users, which I kind of feel like is not important in many ways. But there are also things that are not bad for magic users, like the Brazers of Sleep Smoke, which is very specifically for magic users. Also, the Helm of Brains is also great. There's a Talisman of Chaos Supreme that needs or requires a magic user or you take damage of a certain alignment, of course. There are also many other things that it pays to be a magic user. There are, frankly, when it comes to magic items, so many things it would be too long of a video to talk about, and I'm going to be talking about this a little bit when I talk about magic items in the original Dungeons & Dragons. One of the things I'll get into specifically that I found very interesting, not only in this edition but in others, is the Hermoculus creature, which is animated through the talents of alchemy and a magic user. This creature becomes a servant and a counterpart of a magic user. It is about 18 inches tall, humanoid with bat wings. Some other versions of the games have it more up to the magic user to design. I don't think that's a bad thing here. If it is killed, the magic user in process also takes damage due to their blood link bond connection, the connection between magic maybe, that I think is very good. It should be something that puts you at risk because of the power in which it gives you. There's also an alternative combat editions. I'm calling it the AACS as like an internal acronym because it's just too long. And for those who are keeping track, this is the 5th combat system the game has already used so far, just in these core books. I'm going to make a whole video talking about this combat system specifically, like I have all the other ones in the 1974 and in Chainmail. What makes this one so important is that damage is no longer just a d6, it's now variant damage. Hit points have changed, and things don't necessarily go like 1 hit dice to 1 hit dice plus 1. Now things get full hit dice, but they roll different dice. So it's a little bit more different and a little probably more imbalanced. This rebalancing of the classes and hit points I think was very important. It gives mechanics to the game and it makes it more enjoyable for all the classes there. So the new alternative combat system with the additions part basically uses a d20, uses the man-to-man rules. So a lot of those type of things now apply. And so the blending of these two systems, creating the additional alternative combat system is important to note because when you look at the bonuses that dwarves gain, we're not talking about mass combat here. We're talking about the d20 system. They get +1 to hit all giants, and all giant attacking dwarves get a -1. Elves get +1 to hit with swords and bows specifically. These bonuses are nice, but the halfling is the one who gets the biggest takeaway because they get a +3 when using sling. Now, what's really odd about that is the sling is never detailed in the rules. I have a feeling that the reason why that is not because they disliked. It's not because they disliked the sling. It's that the sling was considered to be such a low costing object, and everything cost at least 1 gold, or you buy them in group. It didn't make sense to list it in the initial things. Now there was other things they listed they didn't need to list, but that was a thing they did. So there are many changes that fill out the classes, that answer some questions, create some gaps. It kind of takes a lot of the notes and stories from the Lake Geneva gaming table and brings it to the world. At the same time this is being made, they're getting ready to start making the monster manual for AD&D. The split with Arneson and Gygax is just starting to merge, and there's a little bit of tension. So that hasn't happened yet, um, but it's coming towards that. So it still has the core rules of what the game was trying to do. You know, when it gives you the hill dwarf, the mountain dwarf, and what they're calling the burrower, I feel like it's still put in the hands of the referee, the dungeon master, and then allows them to make the decision they want to make from there moving forward. And I think that was always their intent. They didn't think modules were going to be the best idea because they thought everyone would come up with their own things because they were all avid readers of fantasy and this type of stuff. So I only have a couple more videos talking about Supplement 1 and all the different aspects, and I'm going to be moving on to Blackmore Supplement 2. So look forward to that. A lot more videos still to come. Did I get this right? Did I get this wrong? Would you guys add anything, take anything away from this? Let me know down in the comments and let's have a conversation. Thank you. Have a good day and keep rolling those dice. Bye.